Thanks for joining us today. Al Laframboise here with Mark Torrey. We work for the developer experience team. We build the developer guides and a lot of the website and the applications that are powered and power the tutorials throughout the developer guides. So you're definitely in the right place. One of the visions that we had was always talking about, or being able to talk about, how to tell you guys on how to build applications that can leverage multiple services that work together. We do so much work just showing you how to use single services to work really well in developer guides, and that's a lot of fun. But yeah, so we wanted to do this particular talk specifically for that. So please share your feedback. Let us know if we hit the nail on the head or if we need to go back to the drawing board. But that's basically what we're going to do today. So we're going to look at integration ideas on how to use different ArcGIS services, obviously to build different powerful applications. We have tons of examples that we're going to go through here that are cool. And we'll show where a lot of the source code came from, so it won't be just smoke and mirrors. You guys will be able to get to the code when you need to. Look at the REST APIs and other developer resources. And again, the idea and the focus today is on integration ideas and sample applications. So we're going to look at some real world scenarios, or as real world as we can put them together. Okay, so if it's all right with you guys, we're going to jump right in here. And so what is leveraging ArcGIS services? Well, when you think about using the services together, then I like to think of it as like a set of building blocks. You can think of it maybe as a foundation, like building a house with a foundation and then the structure on top and the roof, etc. Same concept with ArcGIS services. They really are the foundation for building applications. And there's really two kind of classifications of services. So I think some of us are using hosted services that Esri provides, and then that way you don't need to worry about the services, you're just consuming them. Things like Basemaps, location services, geocoding, all those things kind of fall into that bucket. Or enterprise services, where basically you're managing those services, but you're still building applications against them, right? So I think we fall into those categories. Just a quick show of hands, how many people here are using hosted services, location services that Esri owns and maintains? Any hands? Okay, about half. What about enterprise services, where you're building applications? Okay, about half. Okay, that's good. And that's good, because our talk today, we're going to use mostly hosted services, but the concepts apply in both cases. So as you know, the REST API is very uniform and can be used for both sets of services in most cases. So we'll talk about that as we move through things. And then APIs for client applications sit at the top of everything, right? That allows us to glue. It's the glue for our applications, right? So we can build these things. Those APIs will talk to the REST API. The REST APIs sit on top of the services, and that's how the world's just a happy place, at least for us as developers. Okay, so what does the workflow look like? So Mark and I were talking about this, because we're building apps all the time and trying to figure this out, and I want to come up with kind of a timeline of the thought process. And typically we think about building a mapping application starting with Basemaps to provide the visual foundation, and then, the app needs some data to provide some geographic context. Are you building an app for like oil and gas inspectors, or are you building an application for just showcasing parks, or trying to get feedback from the community about graffiti in your organization? So there's different use cases, right? So that's where data comes into it. And then search and discovery is always important. So there's a set of services that support that. And then routing and directions, again, that can go in different directions. And then spatial analysis is kind of more on the advanced side, but I'm hoping most of us here are GIS users, so hopefully you'll be interested and want to embrace the spatial analysis services. And that's typically where we're looking at solving real world problems and looking for patterns and data and stuff like that. So the services that you use, long story short, really depend on the use case, right? And I know we all have different ones here. We couldn't even go around the room and try to get a collective agreement upon what we're trying to do, because we're all doing different things. But one thing I do know is you're all going to be using developer resources. And so There's 301 to point out here. The dev guides, these are the things that Mark and I build with a small team at Esri. The REST API documentation, hopefully you're familiar with that to some degree. And something you may not be familiar with is a resource called Postman. So just a show of hands, how many people here have used Postman before to make requests and do things like that? Wow, so more than half. That's very exciting because that's a project that Mark and I have worked on for quite some time now, and we want to show you the value of it today. So just a quick spin around the court here. Again, the front end of this talk is about just showcasing different services. So where do we find these things? There's 6 developer guides that you can go to. Mapping location services, it's self-explanatory. You're going to find Basemaps, Geocoding, Places service, portal and data services. So the portal is the thing you log into for the ArcGIS Online and enterprise users, right? And that's where your data is hosted through and so forth. So that's where you learn about how to access your portal itself and to publish data. So it might be vector data or it might be just different services that you have, tile data, etc. Spatial analysis service developer guide specifically for that. Mark's going to showcase that. Low code, no code. You're either doing that or you're not. You're either building apps from scratch or you're trying to take advantage of things like Experience Builder. Security and auth is for everybody. Okay, so this is where you go to learn about the different types of authentication that you can implement in your application. I'm sure most of us are doing this today. Like, should you use API key authentication, or is it user auth where the users are signing in? Is that an OAuth workflow, or is it app auth? Which, again, these are all separate types of authentication that we support, and the type of application you're building will be the type that you choose. And offline mapping apps is a guide specifically for native developers who want to do exactly this, right? You want an application to be fully enclosed on your device, and you can take it offline, you can disconnect from the network, you can go out and, like, I keep going back to the oil and gas rig folks that I see running around near my house all the time, where I know they're offline, I know they're trying to do inspections, and they're trying to collect that data, and they need to upload that data after they're done at the end of the day. So just a quick tour on the developer guides there. What they look like, just to give you a little bit of a structural thing. So mapping location services all have a getting started section, which helps you through picking an account, learning what you can build, and then there's authentication. It comes right up, right? What kind of authentication are you going to use to get an access token? You need an access token to use these services at the end of the day. It doesn't matter if the services are on the enterprise side or if they're on the hosted side, you need an access token. And then, of course, what are the kinds of apps you can build? And this is something that's interesting. When you go to this section here, it's showing you tutorials, and these tutorials can be in multiple different SDKs. So whether it's the JavaScript SDK, MapLibra, or Kotlin, or whatever, all of these different resources are in sometimes different places. So just be aware that when you click on these, you will go to other locations and guides. Here's just a quick example. Let's say you're brand new to Basemaps and you want to discover and learn, what do we talk about Basemaps and how do we talk about them? How do we define them? What are the services that are supported? That's what you're going to find in these chapters here. The other thing that's important is that you can always open up the code throughout the developer guides at any point in time that are showcasing the services. And the only thing that's a requirement is dropping in an API key, which I had, which we'll get back in a second. But nonetheless, you can develop any of these applications or extend them that are in the developer guide. Okay. I think that's all I want to say there. Just a quick overview of the developer guides. So they're there. There's different chapters for different services that you can explore. And the developer guides are written in multiple languages. So you're going to find JavaScript examples. You're going to find native examples in there as well. Sometimes you'll see the full code. Sometimes you'll go to another developer guide that has more information about it. Okay, the REST API. This is one of the essential resources that we use all the time. So there's different kind of getting started steps, and Mark and I were talking about this earlier. So you're going to find this kind of process listed here. Sign up for an account. You may or may not already have an account, get an access token, and then make a request. So we were talking about it, and it's like, man, do we actually ever do this? And most of us already have an account. The thing that we always do is we need to identify the URL, the operation, and the parameters that we're going to use against that REST API and against that service, which means we need to identify the privileges that are required for the access token that's going to be used, and it kind of goes down that road. So our development pattern is more around identifying a service, getting the URL and the params, figuring out what privileges are needed, then go to authentication and maybe build an API key that just has those privileges, and then from there start building an application and then using the access token. So it's a little bit of an expanded pattern that we take internally. The one thing I wanted to point out is that in the REST API, they will point you to the Postman collection. So here's just a quick example. So we're looking at the Basemap style service. And just to back up, so if you guys aren't familiar with it here, we're coming in this direction from the REST API documentation, going over to the Basemap style service, and of course we can read about it, get the URL, start learning about the requests we can make and so forth. That's all pretty straightforward. Here's the get started that I was just referring to. But this is this thing that's often missed, is this valuable Postman collection. So Mark and I have spent a lot of time building up this giant collection of service references that you can make and REST requests that you can make on the fly. So if I expand location services, go to Basemap styles, then what I can do here is just send a request. And this is awesome, because this is what's going to happen to you guys. It's going to fail the first time if you don't create an access token, right? So what Mark and I did is we set this thing up so we can go here to get started, and we can fire off a quick request just to get a short-lived access token. And what that does, that sets this variable for all of these requests. You can see the word access token here as the parameter value, and you can see that it's dotted out. And now I can make that request and it's successful. So that means any other request that I want to make to all of the different services in this guide, and again, I'll just jump over here to, let's go to the static Basemap tile service, and I don't know, let's get a tile from the static Basemap tile service, and there it is. So that access token is now shared for the whole portfolio. So this is one of the reasons we use Postman, is because it's a social thing. We can collaborate with you guys, we can take requests, we can update this really quickly, but we can also create this playground for you guys to change the parameters and work with parameters. And again, here, this is for the navigation style. If I wanted to do something like outdoor, I can make that request as well. And that's going to give us back another image. So I'm testing the REST API here, okay? So I'm just explaining why the resources are what they are, and it's just going to hopefully help you discover how to be more successful when building applications and leveraging them together. Okay. All right, without further ado, that was our intro. What I want to do now is talk about building these services together and building apps and kind of envision that timeline I showed you before. It's kind of what's going through our head as we're building applications. Typically, we start with providing a visual context through a Basemap service. So there's two of them that are hosted by Esri, and those are location services. One is the ArcGIS Basemap style service. The other is the static Basemap style service. You saw them in action just a second ago in the Postman request, okay? And then for data, well, the service that you use really depends on the type of data. So feature services for, if you have attributes and features like points, lines, and polygons, if you have joined records, that kind of thing, that's where feature services really play a role. And then vector tile services, which you can create from feature services, map tile services, again, if you want raster rendering of tiles, scene services, and the list goes on and on and on. Okay, so you find these services in your portal, and you can find them in the portal and data services guide, and if you want to learn how to work with them a little better. Yeah, so for Basemap services, the big choice is raster or vector. And I think a lot of us know that right out of the gate. You're either building an application that supports WebGL, and that's going to give you the smooth rendering and everything that that vector tiles can bring you in styles. A raster format for maybe older devices, network constrained situations, and so forth. There's different families and groups of styles, and that's often a challenging process, is just figuring out the right style for a particular application that you're building. And then there's different use cases. Are you building 2D or 3D? So I have the URLs at the bottom here. And of course, you would take that and either go to Postman and maybe, exercise the particular URL, go to the developer guide to see how client APIs use that URL, or you would just build it into your application. So you have some different options there. For data services, I already mentioned these, typically access them with a URL. Here's a URL, just kind of a template at the bottom. It's the host, so it's either enterprise or it's going to be ArcGIS for the hosted services, your organization ID, this long list. And again, this is for a feature service. And the index of the feature service, if it's 0, if there's only 1, it could be 1, 2, or 3, depending on the number that are in there. So we use this for visualizing, creating interactivity in our applications. Yeah, the use case is definitely query. So that's the strength of the feature services within ArcGIS, is that you can have 10 million features. But guess what? Applications don't typically use 10 million features all at the same time, right? And that's the whole idea of querying and paging. Sometimes you need, a couple page sets to go through. Maybe you'll pull in a couple thousand page sets, and those will come in. And the JavaScript API and the MapLibra Open API will do that paging for you and pull in very large data sets effectively. And now with the support for PBF and MapLibra, it's really advantageous for using these services together. Okay, so that was a lot of kind of intro stuff. Let's take a look at some apps. And we'll do a little bit of app development here, where we start to bolt these services together to build something that you're looking at, like on the screen here. Okay, so gonna move over here. All right, so here's an application, just a standard 2D Basemap application. This is a JavaScript API application, so it's the new 5.0. And this is using a gallery that's built in, so I can just enumerate through some of the different styles and take a look at things. So we'll look at maybe navigation. One of my favorite ones is always down here in the list, unfortunately. It's the outdoor map. It just has great visualization, great colors. And again, if you're an outdoor guy like myself, then this makes a lot of sense for apps that I like to build. Okay, so let's start to make some changes. So here's the source code for the application. We're using the ArcGIS map component here. So one of the first rules for building an application, mapping application that makes sense, is to set up the center location and the zoom level. So I'm going to do that first, and we already landed on outdoor as the style that we want. So we want the component to load that up. We'll come back over here, do a quick refresh, and now we're looking at a very centered location, and this is how your application should start, not giving, obviously, the extent of the world, which isn't very useful. Okay. So now we have this loaded, and we're ready to do a few more things. So hopefully this is a place that you guys recognize, because that's where we're sitting right now. We can see some of the mountains over here with some running trails potentially, or walking trails, and contours. So let's just enhance this a little bit and make some changes. So what I want to do is I'm just going to go over here to our component, and I'm going to change it from a 2D component to a 3D component. And we'll just start with that very first change. So after we do that, then now we have this whole new perspective. So here's the interesting thing about this. You're probably wondering, why is Al showing the JavaScript API 3D when this is a leveraging services talk? Well, the services don't care. The services are just going to provide the tiles that you request. Okay? Now this is up to the client to do the rendering, and that's what it's doing. So it's pulling in a larger tile set. And these are things to consider depending on the usage model that you have. If you're building applications that use the tile consumption model versus session consumption, this is a very large perspective of tiles that it's pulling in, because it's pulling in all the way out to the far horizon as far as we can see. So it's just a higher tile consumption. It's a slower application for that particular reason. But in this case, it's totally fine. So what I want to do now is add some buildings to this. So something that I think a lot of people forget is that we have services, and a lot of services, data services, in the Living Atlas. So I'm going to bring in a data service, and it's called the Esri 3D Buildings. Right? Now this data service you can add on top to your base map to enhance the experience. And we can't see too much here yet, but here, let me just zoom in a little bit, and you can see that we actually do have 3D building footprints and structures that have some level of exaggeration depending on the height of the building. So that's a small way to enhance our application, starting from just the Basemap service. Now we're adding a data service on top of that. Next, I'm going to go here to adding a couple other data sets. So we'll start first with this charging stations one. So I have this tilt button built in because I knew I was going to get tired of always manually trying to find the same spot. We'll let this come to life here in a second. What we need to do here is our buildings are on. We're going to turn on charging stations, and we'll let that load. That'll just take a second to load. All right, while it's doing that, we're actually going to do a few other enhancements. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to turn on some rendering for that 3D buildings layer. So we'll go back here, give ourselves a little bit different visualization. And again, we're just using the two services at this point. So Basemap and the one data service, and we're still waiting for these guys to come into play, and they will eventually. There they are. It takes a little while for some of these services to warm up because I built them like 2 weeks ago. All right, so this is kind of fun. So now we have a lot more context in this application. If I want, I can click on the 3D structures. 3D structures will give us an idea of what they are, like apartments. And then we have the EV stations here. So if you're driving an EV vehicle, you might be interested to know where those charging stations are and what charging inputs that they take. So that's two data layers that we have in here. And the last one I'm going to add, and this one should load up nice and fast. We'll just make sure everything's on. Great. Go back to our view. And I know you guys want to get out and run these trails so bad. Here we are at the conference center, so just down the street. We have a trail network here. This is a data set that's available in ArcGIS. So this is one of the ones stored in the portal. Again, we can see that the difficulty level is strenuous and length and all these good things here. So this was just an example where I wanted to show you how leveraging services was actually possible. We could start with a base map and build on top of that, show it in 3D. The services are going to work just fine for 3D as well as 2D, and then we can add extra layers on top of it. Okay, so it's like a service sandwich, I guess, is the way to think about it. Okay, got a lot of stuff to cover here, so I'm going to keep rolling. So what about building like a search application? What kind of services come into play? Well, probably going to start with a base map still, maybe data services, depending on what we're doing. But I think the obvious suspects are geocoding, places, elevation, and enrichment. So let's take a look at some features there. So geocoding, talking about forward, reverse geocoding. I'll show you some examples in a second. Things to think about is like, how wide is your scope of geocoding? Like, are you geocoding for like just downtown Palm Springs or your local area, or are you geocoding for the world? And the reason I'm saying that is because the parameters that you pass in to the REST API and ultimately the service will dictate how that's processed. Okay, so whether you're using a center point, if you want values like returned back and you want like the rooftop value or the entrance location, like this is all different pieces of data that come back with the address matching geocodes. What else we have here? So we have some URLs at the bottom, which is how you would find and use these things. But something that often complements geocoding is places. So we have a places service that's hosted on Esri. It's a location service. You can access it if you have an ArcGIS location platform account, and very easily. And it allows you to visualize and find POI data. So you can search by extent or nearby. You can pick a category, do an open kind of search, like I'm looking for all sushi restaurants downtown as an example. So those are different things that you can do. So let's take a look at an application that exemplifies that, and we'll start here. So I'm going to start with a quick query. So we'll put in like Palm Springs, and we'll just pick International Airport just to kind of kick things off. So what's interesting is we can follow the requests that are being made here, And this one here, that's important to the REST APIs, find address candidates. So I know this is tough to see, but you'll have to trust me on some of this, that this is the base URL to that service. It's calling find address candidates. We can see the payload that it's accepting or that it's taking. And the important one is single line here in this case. It allows you to take a string that the user types in or a string that isn't address accurate, and it will actually correct it and find the actual geocode location. So that's one example. Let's go here to another place we should know, which is where we're sitting right here now. Another find address candidates is executed. Again, we can preview the response too as well to look at the candidates that were returned. And because there was like a magic key associated with this in the suggestion list, it's going to give us the exact address for our location, so we can see the score is 100 and so forth. So this is the response from the service that's being digested by the application. Okay, I know most of us know this. Another quick thing too is we can reverse geocode. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking on Tockwitz Canyon here, and you can see the address is changing up top here. And it's showing us that it's 488, I think, at this point. And if I go over here and reverse geocode a little further, then it's like 1072. So reverse geocoding is taking XY, right, and converting that into the address that it finds. So you can go forward, reverse, that's what it all means. Okay, next, if we want to enhance this by using Basemap places, then I can change the request that I make to the server. So again, I'm going to take a look at the inspector here. I'm just going to put in, let's see, put in styles, and I'm just going to toggle to none. I'm going to show you the parameters that are passed in here. So you can see right now the places parameter is none, so we're not seeing any places, and I can change that request to the API, make another request where places is attributed. So now the service responds differently. It's going to respond with a style that has these place attributes all active, right, and display, and allows the client to display it. Now, if the client decides to display it or not, it's up to the client, but the server's going to send it. Okay, so that was the point of showing how these attributes are really important. And again, how we discover all this is you can go to the Postman, and you can look at Postman, you can go to the REST API, or you can go to the developer documentation. There's different directions you can go. So here's the thing, we can't really do much with these places at this point. We can't click on them, they're just totally visual. So if we want to enable those places more, we can actually invoke and use the places service. So you'll notice that the places don't change when I'm selecting these two different maps, if you will. But what does change is the behavior. So I can go over here, I can click on a place, and I can get its name, I can see the phone number, the website, different information like that. I can go to Hilton, phone number, email, absolute. So now, like, I've woken up this app. So now I have the base map that's showing places, but now the places are alive and they're active because I'm integrating with the places service. Everybody with me? Okay, and the last piece is, this is a different kind of places search. This is where I'm not asking the Basemap service to provide places. I'm just using a raw Basemap. I'm asking the places service to give me all places that it can find and to page through all the results that it can find and then dump these on the page. And that's what we have here. So this is a much more interactive experience. As you can see, I can go to search nearby if I want, select that, and it's doing this kind of magnifying glass kind of experience where we're looking for types of places that are in this Basemap area. And I can find those or use a filter like hotels or coffee or parks, like depending on what I'm looking for. I will just extend this a little bit more to 1 mile, which is way out here. So we have a lot of places coming back. And I'm gonna use this little filter and look for a place that I really like. The Blue Coyote, maybe you're familiar with it. So the last integration I'm gonna show you is how to integrate places with another service, which is known as routing. And Mark's going to talk to us about routing. And here we can see it's giving us wherever our last pin was, directions to Blue Coyote. if I want to drive by car, or if I want to go there by foot, it's going to give me the most optimal driving directions. So again, it's just this daisy chaining of services together that allow you to build these kinds of experiences and applications. Okay. Right. I want to talk about the elevation service. I'm just going to jump to it. It's pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. You basically want the elevation for a particular location on the planet. The thing that's interesting about our elevation service is that it gives us not only topo elevation, like the height of the ground, it gives us bathymetry information. So we can click in the ocean at different places, and it'll give us the height of the ocean, if that's even a thing. I think it's called bathymetry. Okay, so let's use this application here. I'm going to turn on some trails. We were already checking these out earlier, except now, when I select the trail, I'm going to make a request to the service, and now I have all of this extra information. So we'll just check this trail out. Obviously, I've been eyeing this one and wanting to go for a jog on this one for a while. And we can see that there's a graph here that's showing the elevation. So the elevation is giving us back all of the points that are being collected from this line. It's being plotted here. This is the elevation service in a nutshell. There's not too much more to say. So you can use different, like mean sea level as the base reference for getting these values, or you can use orthographic as well. So there's two different base levels that you can provide. Last thing I want to show you is you don't really need to use a feature that's passed in from a feature service. What I can do is, I don't know, come up with my own path. And let's say I want to go to this trail, all right, and that's kind of fun. But like, I'm feeling super ambitious, and I had a lot of coffee this morning, so I think I can do this 2,500 foot run or walk, whatever it might be at the end of that. So as you can see, you can pass in these batches of data. The elevation service is going to take over and provide some results. Okay, that's that one. The last example I want to show you is GeoEnrichment. This is like where GIS shines. Like, again, this is, I think, where the work that Esri does with our data providers and our services is exponentially powerful. If you want to find and discover local facts like economics, demographics about different areas around the planet, then this is the service to use. So, wow, that was kind of freaky. I did not do that. So the ghost did that. Okay, so what we want to do is get some variables together. They're called analysis variables, and here's the URL that we would use to interact with that service. We're going to call enrich against it, and let me show you this little cool application. All right, so this one here, here's the idea I had. I was like, well, let's enrich zip code areas. So I'm going to click on Palm Springs here, and this is going to find that polygon. It's going to send this polygon to the enrichment service, GeoEnrichment service, and I pass in all these variables. So I was like, well, I wonder how the home value actually changes. So here, like 846, and this polygon zip code, Cathedral City, a little further away, 608. If I go over here, quite a bit further away from downtown, 310. So just an example, and you can see all the different variables I have here. Total household, total units, affordability index, the list goes on. Same thing with population. We can look at median house, like median age, total population in each of these polygons. Lifestyle, this one was kind of fun, like play golf. And what about like golf super fan? I was like, I found that variable, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's got to be a lot of people. Maybe not in this polygon here. And it's interesting because my mother-in-law is currently looking for a place to live in Palm Springs, and she's looking in these 55 and older communities. So I was like, oh man, this is cool. I can do something with that. So let's go back to real estate value. So here's like an area called Four Seasons Palm Springs. We can see the household value there's 723, and she kept mentioning, I don't know, Shadow Hills. And I was like, okay, Shadow Hills. Here's where that polygon is, 55 and older community. And I was like, hey, do you know how expensive it is there? So, I mean, you can find this in other ways too, right? And then I said, hey, do you know like the average age of people that live there, as an example? And do you know this and do you know that? So it became very enlightening. So I'm trying to give you guys, trying to open, I guess, your eyes to all the different types of data you can get back with the GeoEnrichment service. And that was this exercise here. Let's see. Oh yeah, and they can do all kinds of other crazy things here. We can do 5-minute drive time. So if you want to see, if I live in this community here, like what's a 5-minute drive time radius? And then, I don't know, what are the retail businesses that live, that are in this area? So there's like 45 retail businesses. I can click here, I can click in different places. You can get different distances depending on the speed limit of the roads and everything else. So that's searching for statistics in my own kind of polygon that I made. And the last one I thought would be fun is just doing a standard, just point and click by 0.5 mile radius. Again, if you're looking for businesses, maybe retail spending, health, real estate, you can look at the cost of houses and dwellings in this area as well. Basemap's really important here. Basemap's providing, you can see the structures of the homes and so forth. You're getting an idea of how close the structures would be together. So again, just this idea of bringing these services together to solve problems. Okay, I think that's the last service that I have. And I'm going to pass it over to Mark, who's going to take us on a journey using a couple other services, routing and spatial analysis to be specific.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Al. So, we'll talk about kind of specifically routing apps and how other services, we can leverage other services within a routing specific app to really bump up the functionality of that app. And so, in this case, these next few slides, we're going to focus specifically on an overview of the routing service, and then we'll look at a demo that utilizes all these different services together. Okay, so the routing service, right? The Esri hosted routing service, right? You can use to find routes and directions and perform analysis on street networks. On the enterprise side, you can use the hosted service, or you could use your own network analysis service that you've built up on your own to do these same things. So we're going to specifically kind of focus on single vehicle routing and multi-vehicle routing, but the routing service is a large, powerful service, and it does perform other operations such as closest facility or service area, kind of what you saw Al do with the isochrones, the drive times. And then there's a relatively new operation, I think in the past couple of years, a year, is the snap to road service. That'll take, say, if you have GPS values, you can submit a GPX file to the service, and it'll snap, in precise GPS points to the actual road location, which is interesting. But I wanted to mention it, but we won't focus on it. So we'll focus on the single vehicle and multi-vehicle routing capabilities of the service. For single vehicle, right, we have two concepts of simple, right? It just means you just add a start and stop and you get a route back, or an optimized solution where you actually ask the service to order the stops in the most optimal fashion, right, to either save time or distance.
Isn't it also called traveling salesman?
Traveling salesman.
Where you have to stop at multiple locations along the way, and you want to optimize your whole operation for the day. Is that not a scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Traveling salesman. And then on the multi-vehicle side, right, it's a larger concept of we have multiple stops, multiple routes, or vehicles, right, and we want to kind of orchestrate all those to find the most optimal solution. And so there's two endpoints or operations on the routing service. The vehicle routing problem, or VRP service, has been around for years. Recently, the last mile delivery service was released, which really focuses on high density, kind of urban deliveries or pickups per se. So you have a lot of orders to visit, or stops to visit, and you want to optimize those trucks or cars to get all those orders serviced in a very optimized fashion. Okay, so kind of mentioned single vehicle routing, right? The use case for single vehicle routing is, you have a starting location, ending location. A lot of times you'll see this in the navigation type scenarios, that's really all you need is a starting location and ending location. You can get the route from that. But you can also add stops along the way, and then ask the service to either just route me to all the stops, or actually optimize the stops so that we're not wasting gas or time. And then there's multiple travel modes, right? So walking, driving, rural truck driving. Those are all provided by your portal that you can make a request for and get all those travel modes back. You can provide custom travel modes as well, should you see fit. And then again, directions. And so you see we have two URLs there. There's a concept of a direct request, right? Meaning I just send a request to the server and it hands me back the response. Versus a submit job request or a job request where I send all my parameters to the server chunks and works on all that, and I check the status of it periodically, and then when it's done, I'll take those results and use them in my application. And so we'll kind of see that concept throughout.
That the job request, Mark, as you set up for the demo there, the job request is really nice if you want to free up the application. You don't want to hold the application up.
Right.
You can fire off a process and then just come back and check on it, and the user can go on with other things. So that's a nice thing about these very highly asynchronous job requests, where you make the request and then kind of place it. It's like, you just kind of place the request, kind of wait and come back over time.
Right, absolutely. And for larger requests too, right? If I have, hundreds of thousands of stops I'm wanting to get to, that could take some time to process. So we could send a job request to it, let it work on it, and then our app can go do other things. And then when it's done, we'll be notified and we can add the results or do something more with the results once they're there. Okay, and then a little bit on fleet routing, or multiple vehicle, multiple stop routing. We want to really optimize. You'll see a lot of this in kind of the big corporate delivery institutions, right? Where you really want to be able to kind of really focus and dial down this real world parameters, right? Like my trucks can only leave from the start point at this time, and they need to go to these deliveries in certain time windows, and there's a certain amount of time that they can spend on site. And so it's really complex and big, but for the most part, there's these three inputs that you need to provide, right? The orders, and that's where you want to go, where you're wanting to pick up or deliver something. And you can specify, you can really model those orders with service time and time windows and other attributes, quantities, constraints, as you see fit. And then the depots are just the starting points and ending points of your vehicles. So you have, maybe your vehicles start from a garage and you want to end up at a warehouse somewhere. You can specify that as the depots. And these are all, I should mention, these are all just feature layers, right? So just implemented as a standard feature layer in your organization. And then the routes are the actual description of the vehicles that you're wanting to use, right? And those have constraints and end times and start times and quantities and capacities as well. Okay, and so then here we just see the two URLs of the VRP, vehicle routing problem operation, right, which is the kind of the older workhorse that has been around for a while, and then the new last mile delivery, which is really highly optimized for a specific use case. Okay, so with that, let's look at a example here of a single vehicle routing. scenario, I've got a MapLibra application here using the MapLibra ArcGIS plugin. And we're going to utilize a few of those services that we looked at the beginning for a kind of a trip planner. So what I want to do while I'm here in Palm Springs, well, first we're going to specify our stop point, right, using the Geocoding service. So we're going to look for the airport here, and that's going to be added to the map. And so now our stop has been added to our list here. And I could continue on down the route using the Geocoding service, but I've actually have a data service here in my portal of other places I want to stop. All right, so we've got these points of interest per se that I know I want to go to.
So maybe you found these by researching online, and these are like, I don't know, really hot spots to go to as an example?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So, well, we'll let that load. But what I've got here is I can actually have a tool here to actually go out and grab those locations, bring them into our app, and add them to our list of stops that we want to make here. All right, so we can kind of go through these. Here's the tramway. It's actually really cool. The botanical garden, right? The art museum. When I want to grab something to eat at some point, and then I want to end up at the Renaissance where we are here now. And then incorporating the places service, maybe we want to come in here and say, well, originally I wanted burgers, but I want to make a places search and find what's around the burgers. Maybe we feel maybe more we'll go to the pizza place that's nearby within 500 meters of the burger place. So we can utilize the places service to give us a quick look of what's around that stop. Okay, so we got all our stops in place, and now I'm going to send those stops over to the service, and I'm going to do that by utilizing the ArcGIS REST.js API. And as I mentioned, we're using MapLibra, so I'm just going to take advantage of the ArcGIS REST.js library and grab our stops that we have in our list, and I'm going to send them to the solve route here. All right. And I've got, we're going to provide our authentication, our API key, and then one of the parameters of the single vehicle routing is whether we want it to find the best sequence. Do we want to do simple or optimized routing? And I'm going to say false right now. And if we were to say true, we're going to use these, which we'll see in a second here, but we'll let that run. And then our service is sent to the server, and we get the response back, and it looks like, okay, well, it found a route. Looks like hitting all those stops in that order that we added them in will take about an hour. All right, 58 minutes, and it's going to be about 20.28 miles. If I then actually choose to, hey, can you optimize these routes for me? All right, we're going to take this off, and we're going to actually find the best sequence. You'll know that route gets redone, and now we've taken 18 minutes off the route, and it's gone down to 12 minutes and 12.63 miles. Right, so it's 8 miles difference. All right, so that's pretty cool that it'll reroute those. And then I'm actually going to want to use another service. I'm going to add in the ArcGIS traffic service just to get an idea of what's around. And looks like, okay, well, we've got some incidents here. It looks like there may be a road closure close by here. So if I zoom in, we can see, okay, there's a road closure out here by the convention center. It looks like down here, downtown, of course, it's going to be a little bit congested. And we can look around and we can kind of get an idea of what's happening in the app by utilizing this service.
So I think a lot of people often underestimate some of the layers that are available in the Living Atlas. And that's where we pulled this layer from. And it's actually a service. It's a service-based layer, and it's giving you back all this really valuable information. We've taken just like a routing application, added a whole bunch more very valuable information. I know for me anyways, I like to know where the holdups are on particular routes. And the routing engine does take into consideration the speed for these different sections of road as it builds the route. Okay, so it is integrated to that service in the back end, something you may not have ever known. I didn't know until I started experimenting with it. So this is kind of validating it, giving you more of a visual experience with your routing and providing more value.
Yeah. I guess one thing to note about the routing service too is that, under the hood it is incorporating geocoding as well, right? So it'll find the best, based on the points we give it, it could find the best spot.
So it'll snap the points to a routable spot to stop.
Right.
That's cool.
Okay, cool. So that's routing apps. Real quick, let's move on to the spatial analysis apps and using the spatial analysis service. So spatial analysis, I'm sure you guys know, is kind of a huge topic that has a lot of ins and outs to it. As an overview, the spatial analysis service discovers patterns, finds trends, and gains insight into your geospatial data. But there are many ways to do spatial analysis. In this particular case, we're going to look at a server-side based approach. Right? If you're familiar with the ArcGIS Map Viewer, the analysis tab there, those tools that you see all run from the spatial analysis server. And so what that means is those are asynchronous jobs, right? We send something to the server does its thing and sends us the results back. And so, there's a lot of examples. I've got some specific examples from the guide here that I wanted to show you that are utilizing the spatial analysis service. I'll let you guys definitely encourage you to take a look. This one, for instance, we have some flood zones, right, and some parcels. We can use the spatial analysis service, say, hey, tell me all the parcels that are in those flood zones. Right, so if we look at the results, then we get the property areas within those flood zones.
So those are the phone calls you would have to make if there was going to be a flood problem in this area, potentially.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then this one is kind of cool. We have these traffic incidents in San Francisco, and we can run a hotspot analysis on that. And as we slide the results over, you can see, okay, as probably expected, right, downtown area is really a hotbed of traffic incidents, which makes sense. So we can see, and one of the nice things about the service is you get the symbology and the legend information back from.
So you can build a renderer like you have without too much work. Yeah, that's really nice.
All right. Okay. What's next? So a little bit more about the spatial analysis service, which we've talked about. I did want to mention there's some built-in GeoAI capabilities in the spatial analysis service. It's been in there for years. It's under the deep learning kind of module. So there's a detect objects that does deep learning on the server side, and that's all baked into the service. Again, there's depending on the endpoint that you use, there's those processing types, direct versus job, and then some important, concepts that you want to be wary of, or not wary of, but aware of while you're using it is the inputs, right? So it's always, the output that you get is always going to be based on what you input, so you want to make sure you're kind of inputting the proper data into the service, and there's a plethora of formats that you can input, right? You can send it an item ID, you can send it an item ID to a feature layer, you can send it the feature layer URL, you can send it a JSON format as an input, and then you can specify how you want the output. So the service will actually create a new service for you in your org, or you can just ask for the results back in JSON format.
So this spatial analysis that'll input feature data from feature services, and then spatial analysis services that will perform raster operations.
Correct.
To do something.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's almost like a breakdown, different categories within the spatial analysis service per se. There's feature analysis, which is feature specifically feature data, right? We have vector features with attributes, or raster, right? We're actually performing concepts against a raster. Okay, and again, yeah, the majority is are going to be the submit job, right? Asynchronous job. Okay, so with that, let's look at another example app here of our Palm Springs location. So what we got here is a kind of a little scenario. Let's say we want to incorporate multi-vehicle routing and the spatial analysis service using a couple, one result of the spatial analysis service, and then we actually want to run a spatial analysis. And then we want to do a last mile delivery to route to those locations. So in this particular case, let's say we have like a pool company that maybe they want to send out flyers to houses in Palm Springs that have pools. So in the map viewer, I ran this detect objects using deep learning tool, with the following parameters, right? Using this NAPE imagery provided by Living Atlas. And I got back these locations that tell me, with a confidence of 93, that appears to be a swimming pool to me. Okay, so in regards to maybe utilizing a data service, we can reach out in our, and I should say this is a open layers application, and we're going to go out and we're going to reach out to that that pool service here in my org and add that to the map. Okay, now we'll go quick here. And then so those polygons that I brought in, and now I want to find the center points of those pools just to run some spatial analysis here from my app. I'm going to use ArcGIS REST again to submit a job to the find centroids URL, and I'm going to pass in my input layer, which is the swimming pool detection polygons, right? And that'll run through, and those points should show up. Points. Let's just refresh that real quick. We'll just go through this real quick.
So the first part, Mark, was going from the image, then you're getting you're getting a polygon layer back.
Right.
And each of those polygon outlines represents what the AI thinks is a pool.
Right.
And it's detecting that. And then this next part is where trying to find the centroids.
Yeah, so it actually came back. I'm not sure what the holdup was, but so we sent the centroids to the spatial analysis service, came back with those centroids, and then I'm going to use the last mile delivery service to say, okay, so I own a pool company. How do I get my guys out to all these pools, right? And so we're going to send the orders, which are those center points, and we're going to get. We'll say we're going to give it 10 trucks and ask the service, how many trucks do you think it'll take to render this in these specific amount of time? So we've given it 480 minutes, and we'll run that, and our results will come back, and you see we've got all our 128 deliveries fulfilled. It took 9 trucks to do it. We've got all these trucks that have around 15 places to visit each, right? So it's geometrically clustered these objects all in the same place, and I know I need 9 drivers, and it's going to take them about 8 hours with a 30-minute service stop at each stop, So
that's last mile delivery.
That's last mile delivery.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah, on that, we'll finish it up here. Please, provide your feedback. you connect with us on social, and then, I don't know, if we got a couple minutes, I guess, if any questions. I think that's what we got for you.
Yeah, thanks much. Don't forget to leave survey, and hopefully you guys learned a bit about leveraging the different services together, build these different apps. That was our whole goal today. Maybe left you some ideas. So go to the developer guides. All the code is based in there. We just kind of compiled a couple apps together for this presentation. So yeah, thank you very much.